So to kick off, I think it's obvious that we have very poor air quality in Melbourne, in the Latrobe Valley in particular, and also probably in areas like Wilson's Prom, etc. And of course we have hazardous air quality in the northeast and also in East Gippsland, which has been occurring for some weeks now because of all of the fires. The smoke that we're experiencing in Melbourne and Latrobe Valley, etc., is predominantly coming from Tasmania because they've got fires as well. That smoke has come over the landmass, and we have some contribution from our northeast and East Gippsland fires as well. What we're experiencing today will certainly persist into tomorrow. We might see some light relief, but we may not, and we're certainly not expecting this to change very much until Wednesday. So what that means is people really need to be aware of what they are doing, what the air quality is like around them, but it's a really good idea for people to have their own plan as to how they're going to end up trying to take a break. Brett?
Sure. Brett Sutton, Chief Health Officer for Victoria. So obviously anyone can experience symptoms from smoke levels today. A lot of people will have cough or worsening of cough. They might also get nose and throat irritation or eye irritation. But for vulnerable individuals, people at risk of worse health effects from smoke might have even worse symptoms. So people with existing heart and lung disease and diabetes, children 14 and under, people over 65 years of age, pregnant women, they're the ones that we're particularly warning to try and minimise their smoke exposure, because people with pre-existing heart and lung conditions can get much worse symptoms. They can get shortness of breath, chest tightness, wheezing and really significant cough, and we know that it's a threat to life as well for some people. So for those people in particular, they really need to try and minimise their exposure to smoke, but anyone and everyone might have some of those effects with worsening of cough. For asthmatics, people really need to be aware of their asthma management plans. If you don't have one, see a GP and get one. If you do have one, activate it. So people who are wheezing more, coughing more, tighter in the chest, have more shortness of breath, really need to make sure that they're upping their reliever medication as required, but also their preventer medication. The preventer medication will have better control of their asthma. And if they're wheezing and coughing more, it means that they haven't got good control of their asthma. For others, it's really a case of seeing what your symptoms are like, seeing your GP if you need to, but nurse on call is available all of the time. If you're really in dire straits, then obviously call 000 as required.
Brett, during the thunderstorm asthma in particular, we saw people who had never previously suffered from asthma, in some cases, die. Is this going to affect people who have in the past never had asthmatic symptoms before?
There may be some people who've had symptoms who've never had diagnosed asthma, but had probably had wheeze after exercise or wheeze with coughs and colds. That's really undiagnosed asthma that might be presenting itself now. So people who have those symptoms of ongoing cough, wheeze, chest tightness, they might have asthma, and they really should get a proper diagnosis so that they can have a management plan put in place. But yes, there are other people who may never have had symptoms who are now exposed to smoke and developing some wheeze, and it might be a sign that they're asthmatic underneath it all.
Should people be avoiding exercising today or tomorrow?
Yeah, certainly for the most vulnerable groups that I spoke of, people should try and avoid exercise. Staying indoors is obviously another way to protect yourself, but really you need to be in a space where the smoke is at the lowest levels. That might be in your work environment, that might be at home, that might be in an air-conditioned building as part of a public facility.
On social media, you're hearing from people saying that they're waking up and they can smell it in their bedrooms. Is that an indication of just how bad it is?
Australian homes, unfortunately, aren't the best in terms of insulation. It is an indication of how high the smoke levels have been, but it's also an indication that if you've got prolonged high levels of smoke, that after a while it starts to equilibrate within your air inside your home. So it's an indication of both the levels but also how long it's been around that it's starting to get through our leaky homes.
Are there any suburbs that are worse than the others?
So we're certainly, if you have a look at the Melbourne area and Latrobe area, and if you look at EPA's AirWatch site, you'll see colours and you'll see bubbles. So at the moment, Geelong's okay, and Melbourne is what I would call poor. But there are other suburbs, Brighton and a few others, Dandenong, that have hit the very poor category already. So the question was asked before about smoke coming indoors. Yes, it will, but close everything up. Seal the doors, and now would be a good time to do that, because this is going to persist for the rest of the day, and if it persists into the next couple of days, then you want to have as much clean air as you can within your home. And some homes are just terribly leaky and they will be problematic, so that's the opportunity to have your own plan and work out, have you got friends and family that might have a better space? Have you got the local library or the shopping centre or whatever it might be to provide some relief? Because even taking a break in these conditions is really important.
Is it fair to say it's hazardous?
At the moment, our readings, remember we measure it on our instruments across our network. At the moment in Melbourne, it's not hazardous. In the Latrobe Valley, it's heading up towards that level. But we also need to be mindful of our colleagues who are experiencing these fires in our northeast and east Gippsland. They have had hazardous air quality for a couple of weeks now. And so what we've got is an indication, and it's much lower than what they have been experiencing. So I think we also need to be mindful that we've got people in the state who are experiencing much higher concentrations.
Can you clarify something? Is wearing a face mask that you could buy from Bunnings or a pharmacy going to help you in any way, shape or form on the streets of Melbourne?
Good question on face masks. People clearly have asked the question on social media. They want to know if it can help. We're giving a message that face masks are not a cure-all. For some people, especially those in those most vulnerable categories, a P2 or N95 mask, the ones that you can get at hardware stores, that often have a little valve for breathing, and look for that P2 or N95 descriptor. Those masks can filtrate the particles that we're talking about here, and we know that for the most vulnerable people that may be a useful additional protection. It's especially the case if you can't get out and temporarily relocate to areas of better air quality, or if you can't stay indoors. If you're forced to be outside for work purposes or other purposes, then that might be a time to use a mask. But it is important to recognise that masks can give you a false sense of security. Masks are not something that you put on so that you can go outside when in fact we're telling you to stay indoors. And for some people it can increase the work of breathing and they can get quite fatigued with it. So it's not for everyone. They need to be fitted properly. If they're not fitted properly, they're not working. If they're fitted properly, they can actually make it pretty difficult for some people.
So those fabric masks, sorry, to clarify, like what you might see, I don't know, a nurse wearing on a dentist assistant.
Yeah, surgical masks, bandanas are not going to do the job. So we're really talking about those high filtration masks that you can get at hardware stores, and that actually Victoria is distributing now to the areas that are affected by the state of disaster. They're going to the incident control centres, to the relief centres and health centres for, again, those most affected by very hazardous levels of air quality where there really is an option to temporarily relocate.
What are the health implications of bushfire smoke versus your standard smog or pollution you might get in the air?
Really nothing. The bushfire smoke is hazardous. I mean, often recycling fires are called toxic, but bushfire smoke is also toxic. There are health effects from bushfire smoke that is really the same as any other smoke that you can think of.
Maybe just one more. In terms of the rain, how does that affect the smoke?
Oh, that's good.
Okay, well, rain, if it was drenching rain, would be terrific because it would knock it out. But in the current circumstance, it's insufficient and the amount of smoke is too much, and the weather conditions are kind of pulling it coming up from Tasmania, and we have that effect from the northeast and East Gippsland as well. So very difficult conditions, and that's why and we've got these low winds. Wind is also a good thing too. So the rain has done almost nothing. I was quite surprised because I heard rain this morning and I thought, oh, you beauty, but it's doing nothing. So I think that's why the next couple of days we're going to have this poor air quality, so we need to plan for it and take appropriate measures.
How unusual is it?
How unusual is it? I've been in Melbourne now for nearly 3 years. I've not seen anything like this, and we always have issues in May and June where we've got those temperature inversions and everyone lights up their wood heater, and we get impacts from outer areas from burning, and you would have those messages regularly. In terms of this event, with the fires in the landscape and the sheer number of areas that are affected by poor air quality, I don't think we've seen this. So I think we need to be aware that these fires are going to go on, as the Commissioner has been saying, for some 2 months, and so we need to plan appropriately as a community across the state to actually manage these issues.
For those that do work outside, especially if it is going to continue for the next day or two, is it at the stage where you think bosses should be considering
I might leave that to the Chief Health Officer on that difficult question.
Yeah, look, really for employers, it's a case of managing their occupational obligations to their employees. There are occupational health and safety laws that apply there, but it needs to be considered on a case-by-case basis. There are obviously people who are now at the front line working. They're given masks. Some of them have respiratory apparatus, but for others it might be a case of having periods of respite or making sure that they are monitoring their symptoms and reporting appropriately.